we are thoughtbot. We have a lot of documentation. So this is a guide to our guides, which as Matt has pointed out on Basecamp when there was a discussion on all the books and what they do, it's not that complicated, is it? All right, so welcome to thoughtbot. All the red things, so I'm going to share this with everyone afterwards, and there might be useful links. These are the links. So here is our welcome to thoughtbot GitHub document, and it has a lot of useful information. It probably seemed a little overwhelming at first. It did to me. I spent like a lot of time here on my first few days at thoughtbot, and it was in Basecamp at the time. As you can see, we use a lot of services, and detailed guides on how to use each one of these services in the thoughtbot way is somewhere in our GitHub, Basecamp, Slack, or other locations. And so on. So this is a great welcome document. It has a lot of useful information, but eventually you're going to need more than it provides. So what's next? Yeah, do a lot of things. We're great at documenting them. And we now have a lot of documentation. So the books. Most people are probably familiar with all of the books, and I've spent a good deal of time in them. The Playbook is our famous one that lots of people outside thoughtbot know as well. It's easily one of the most useful resources when you're talking with potential clients, because you can be like, hey, look at this great book that we spent a lot of time writing and answers most of your questions. It has design sprint tips, preferred technologies, and many other things for how thoughtbot runs as a company. And the handbook, which is also public, and it's basically policies and benefits. It's really important, somewhat dull things for the most part. It's as much of an official doctrine as we have. I spent a lot of time on it in the first month after I joined. And the cookbook, this is another Matt Jankowski quote, and it's private. There's a lot of stuff in here, like a lot of stuff. We are talking about performance reviews and, you know, what do I do when I haven't worked with that person? Answers to those questions are in the cookbook. There's a performance review section that's mostly for managing directors, but if you read through it all, it tells you about opting in or opting out of a review and that kind of thing. So most questions you have are probably answered in here, but it's big and finding everything can be difficult. And the guides, which aren't technically a book, but they function as a book. And there are programming best practices. Really useful when you're doing code review and you're like, I'm not sure what this, if I'm right about this syntax question, I'll go check the guides. Yeah. But this is all on GitHub, which means it's all searchable. And guess what? We have a search, which is fantastic. And it wants to go there, which is unfortunate. But in any case, has anyone not used search.thoughtbot.com? No? Okay, cool. So you're all familiar with it. And this is one of the reasons why we've been moving a lot of our documentation to GitHub, is because it makes it really easily searchable. There's some question as to, you know, whether this is just whether search.thoughtbot is a great useful tool, or whether it is a band-aid for a larger problem, like should our documentation be so hard to parse we need to search for it. But whatever the answer to that is, it's really helpful. All right, Trello. So I'm going to spend a little time talking about Trello. Actually, most of the slides in this presentation are about Trello, because it's not as easily searchable as GitHub is. So there's a ton of useful things there, and they're a little harder to find. There's some documentation in Trello. There's a lot of utility. The documentation we've been trying to move into GitHub as much as possible, but you'll still find, like, here's an advisor checklist when you get a new client. It's in Trello right now, which makes it hard to find. It'd be great to have it in GitHub. So we're slowly moving all those things over. Sales. We have a sales board. Most of you are probably familiar with it. There's lots of how-to sales resources in the books as well, but if you go to the sales board, read the instructions, it pretty much guides you through how we do sales, like what our process is. Same with customer success and hiring. And yeah.
If you have filters on, you will not see the instructions at the top. But at the top of your call and all of those boards, there is a card that has explicit instructions.
It's super useful. Sometimes templates will be in there, and you can copy the instructions card and use the checklist it has in it. So this is one I found recently, actually. We're all familiar with setting up Rails projects, but we actually have a template. So hopefully this works. Yeah. And look at all these nice cards it gives you. So you can just copy this board in and use it as a template for your new Rails project. And it just has this is a checklist, reminder of all the things that we like to have on our Rails projects. Cool. And there's another one for iOS. And Design Sprint. So who's used the Design Sprint template before? A lot of people? Okay, cool. Here you go. I think this is largely the work of Kyle Feather. He's done a great job. You can copy this board in. You have all these cards set up. When Will and I were doing the Measy Design Sprint the other week, we filled these cards up with all of the pictures that we took, all the notes we took, and it was amazing to have this resource here as a place to keep everything organized. And if you've never done a design sprint before, or maybe you've done them before but you're leading one for the first time, you can come right here and here's setup sprint room, and look, just a reminder of all the little things that you need to have. And investment time. So sometimes you're facing the question of, I'm not sure exactly what I want to do for investment time. I want to help out, I want to work with people. What are people doing? So this is a relatively new board, and it's super useful for answering that question. We study, we build tools, open source libraries, all of these things. So access limit right now, Cameron and Will are working on it. And you can chat them up if you want to work on it too. And some of these have, let's see if I can find one that has a really intense description. This one has a link to the GitHub. Yeah, FormKeep has some instructions. So varying levels of detail in the cards, but so basically you come here, you will leave this board with something to do, and you'll know who to contact to talk about it with. Slack, yes. So Slack we have a lot of channels on Slack, and I think we get more every day. I don't know what most of them are, but here are a few useful ones. Sales, and everything that happens in Trello for sales gets tossed in here, so you get kind of a running feed of what's happened for the day. You can look over it really easily. OOP, which I had to change this morning because I think until yesterday it was code, and it's for general object-oriented programming talk. We have a functional programming one too. We have web for web PRs, and Xcode for iOS PRs, and design, and headers. My favorite. Yes, we have one for almost every programming language in existence, I think. So at one point I was like, I have so many Slack channels that I've joined, and I keep cutting them back, but then I get more. What do I do? And I discovered that you can star them, and now I get to only pay attention to my starred ones while letting the other ones accumulate, which is a really useful feature that I overlooked for a few months. So why did I include Slack in this documentation talk? It's because Slack often serves as documentation for me. That's the whole point of making all our conversations public as much as possible, is because Slack has a very searchable history, and I've answered my questions by searching in Slack before. And I might go back, 2 months to something Nick said on October 12th. This is a real example. And then I didn't have to go ask someone again because it was already in Slack. Dropbox. So 1Password Vault, probably the most important thing on a day-to-day basis that we have today. Business documents, the proposals, agreements with clients, those kind of things. Document templates. We used a sample user testing script for the 5th day of a design sprint. That's in there. Just modify it, and you have a really nice, beautiful testing script to use. We have a library, lots of interesting and useful books in there. I'm tempted sometimes to just go grab a book and read it because, hey, we have these coding books for free and they're interesting. And design resources, which a designer could probably speak to more than I could, but a lot of our projects have a folder you're working on a client, and you toss the icons or fonts that you're using for that client into the Dropbox folder for them. Basecamp, everyone's favorite.
One other thing that from our side is that proposals don't actually, templates for proposals don't actually live in Dropbox, they live in a GitHub repo.
Yes, that's true.
And create a copy.
Yes. Do actual proposals live in Dropbox?
No, signed proposals live in, signed proposals live in Dropbox. Proposals that are like in the works live on GitHub, PRs, and
Okay.
copy and templates.
Okay, cool. So signed proposals are in Dropbox.
They are in Dropbox.
Cool. Yeah, Basecamp, that tool. It's mostly a forum for public discussions right now, but it used to be a lot more, and a lot of that. It used to be a lot of documentation, a lot of credentials and stuff we kept in Basecamp. It was a store-all for us, and so it still contains some resources, like the Apple developer account details. So anyone who's starting to do iOS coding and you just set up your account, this is where you come to do it. So it's my last stop before I ask someone because I don't like searching through it. I think it's difficult to do. But if you haven't found it anywhere else, look through Basecamp because odds were it was there at one point in time. Okay, so just a few other resources. Some of you may have used tbot.io. It's an internal link shortener, but it also remembers things, and sadly, some of these are broken, which is unfortunate. So here, let's see, I don't remember how to get the forecast, but someone made a link for it. An average year forecast. So this is kind of a growing library that we can create ourselves. So if you spend a lot of time looking through Basecamp and you found that one document that explains how to set up this one application that you need, then make a link for it here so you remember it and other people can find it with a nice descriptive name. And we have an Alfred workflow. So a lot of us use Alfred. I don't think all of us do, but this links to a Basecamp document, and I think Chris in Boston made the workflow. And it goes to search.thoughtbot, but it also looks through a few other things first before going there. So it's just a convenient tool. And our blog, which is kind of another book, but with less of a formal structure. Yeah, so we use a lot of other tools, of course, like I just went to Forecast and Harvest and Namely. But this is our documentation that hopefully will teach you to use those other tools if you're not already familiar. And that's basically it. So any questions? Or does anyone else have other documentation that I haven't included here that they'd like to toss in?
Just to kind of concern this week, we were talking about like other consultancies in New York. There is a cities repository where we keep like location-specific information, and what we have varies from city to city, but it can include things like good places to eat if you're visiting that city, or good places to host a meetup if you're in that city, that kind of stuff. And other consultancies and all this kind of things. So it doesn't have the book suffix, but it's there.
That is there.
Actually,
Okay.
that's a really good point because so if you look at the Boston one specifically, it's actually quite extensive and it's like very helpful to the extent of like what if I need a lawyer or a real estate group or a X. So at some time ago, Tyson and I kind of collaborated on quite a few filling out because it's just the two of us. It's actually like chops and sushi bars. But if anybody has any contribution to things that they're like passionate about, that like we're gonna have people from other cities coming in, and they might need things like if you found an apartment recently, or
things that people are good at, things that people are interested in working on, and things that they're not interested in working on, and maybe places that they're willing to travel to. And so if you are trying to staff a project or like find people who are knowledgeable about a specific topic, you can reference this page. That's the thing, it's like people know about it, but it doesn't get used enough.
I think downloaded it to see what I have this week. Yes, or a Slack conversation about that.
And on the topic of spreadsheets we use, there's also a conferences one, which lets you see the conferences people are going to and who's going. I believe there's one for giving these talks as well. Yeah. So I brought this back up because like, the most important thoughtbody thing in this whole presentation is this line. Read and edit anything you want. You are encouraged to contribute everywhere you see opportunities for improvement. So yeah, that's why our documentation is always living and growing, and it's awesome. All right. Anything else?
Is the information in this presentation anywhere like one place?
It's in a GitHub repo, and I'll also make it into a PDF probably. I think I can easily toss that in so that you have it in pretty slides as well.
Also, team
Points that it will also be available in video.
Yes.